Hi, Ray here. Would you like to make an attractive television console table that will fit up to at least a 65-inch TV, as well as room for your entertainment center, games, and so forth below? If that has an interest to you, stick around. I'm going to show you how to make this. Starting this project out with making the top of the console. These are 3 poplar 1x6 boards, so they're 5.5 inches across each board, 16.5 inches for the entire console top. It is 70 inches wide this way. So this is going to be our top. First thing we want to do is to screw and glue these together for extra strength. Now, we're going to use pocket holes to put these together. One thing you want to be sure of is which side is it that you want to be on the top, because the pocket screws need to be in the bottom. So in this case, this board here has what I think some really pretty grain and color in it, so I want that to be the top. So the next thing I'm going to do then is to flip these over to make sure I know that the bottom is facing toward me, and then I'm going to mark where I want the screws. And I'm going to put 5 screws in across the length of this board. So I've marked my boards where I want to put my pocket hole screws. So on the outside boards, there are 5 marks for the pocket hole screws. On the middle board, I will come each way. I'll put a screw into the board this way and a screw into this board this way. That ought to keep this nice and solid. There's going to be heavy TV on top, so I want to make sure it's not moving around. The other thing I do is when I mark for my pocket hole screws, I put the line high enough that I can see it over the top of my pocket hole jig. You'll see what I'm talking about when I put it on there. But then I also put a little arrow mark at the end to make sure that I remember that's the way I'm drilling. Little tip for you, because I have in the past drilled the wrong way. See, the line needs to come up above the jig so you know where you need to drill it. And again, you can see the arrow, so I know that I want to drill down that way. Then I just have to get it level on my board there, tighten it down, drill my hole. So I'll continue to drill all these holes, and then I'll bring you back. All right, we have all of our pocket screws in now. What we're going to want to do is run a bead of glue down along the edge here, and then on the edge here, before we put our pocket screws in. And of course, the trick with the glue is to get enough on, but not get so much on that it's squeezing out the edges after you join these together. If it does, you want to take a wet rag and wipe that glue off right away, or else it's going to affect if you want to stain, or in my case, I'm not going to stain, I'm just going to put polyurethane. But if you don't wipe that off with water, it's going to affect how that polyurethane or stain looks when you put it on the wood. In fact, the wood glue just won't take the stain, so it'll look completely different and not very good. All right, so this one's ready to go. I'm going to smooth out the second one, and then we'll come back. So we've glued the edges of our boards together here, and then what I've done is I've sandwiched the 3 boards here between the board at the top and the bottom with clamps. Did that in 2 places. Also used 2 longer clamps to pull it together this way to make sure that the sides are nice and joined with the glue. And then I put 2 clamps on each end to make sure that my boards are nice and flush, so it's going to keep it as flat as possible when I put these screws in. So when I flip it over and I want the top to be nice and smooth, it'll minimize the amount of sanding that I have to do. All right, so now we're at the point where we want to put our pocket screws in. And that's pretty simple. We're just going to drive every one of those screws in just like I did that one. So you can see that I did have a little bit of glue bleed out here. And once it gets just a little tiny bit dry, I just take a razor, very carefully go across there. It'll scrape all that off, just like that. And then I go ahead and take a wet rag and just go over it to make sure there's no glue residue left on the board. You may have noticed that there's a little bit of masking tape on the ends of my blade, and what that does is that masking tape will keep the blade just enough off of your wood that the corners of the blade won't scratch your wood, but you can still get the middle right down flat to make sure you get all that glue off, just like that. Works out really well. The plans for this project come from the Craig Tool Company. They have a website called buildsomething.com, and it's called an industrial farmhouse console table. And this is a really good plan. You can pull it up here. You can pull up your steps, the tools that you're going to need, the materials you'll need so you know what to go out and buy, and then the cut list. So this is where I am right now, is I'm on the cut list to start to cut things and put them together. So I'll be following this cut list fairly closely, other than instead of having the steel X straps there, I'm actually going to have an extra shelf, and it's not going to be quite as wide as theirs because it has to fit in between two brick walls. So it can only be 70 inches wide instead of 71.5 inches wide, which is what they have here. So I'll be cutting these two supports in the front and the back just a little bit shorter. So I'm basically taking this plan and modifying it such that it'll work for me. Now, one of the first things on the cut list are 6 12.5 inch 2x4s. So I've got my 8-foot 2x4 set up on my miter saw here, and I created this little jig right here that allows me to slide this up and down to whatever length I want so I can do repeated cuts. I will reference below the video that I made as to how you can construct one of these, because they're really helpful. You'll see how quickly I can cut several boards the exact same length. I checked my cut, it's exactly at 12.5 inches. You do want to be careful, 2x4s are pretty heavy, so you want to slide that down gently against your stop block there to make sure you don't push it out of position. All right, so I've cut all the boards that I need for the frame. What I've got here are 6 2x4s cut at 12.5 inches. I've got 4 2x4s cut at 34 inches. These will be the table legs, if you will. I've got 6 pieces here cut at 61 inches. Now the plan called for 62.5 inches, but remember I'm making mine not quite as wide as theirs is. And I've got an extra shelf. So this will be my top shelf and my bottom shelf. My middle shelf, instead of using a 2x4, I'm just using 1x4s. It's not going to need a lot of support, and I'll be able to Craig jig screw that, pocket hole screw that in there just fine. And it'll actually be a little bit less weight because, as you can imagine, with all of these 2x4s, this is going to be a fairly heavy table. So now we're going to move on to the next step. And we're going to use our pocket hole drill to start putting all the pocket holes in these so we can put this frame together. Now when you're using a pocket hole jig, you have to make sure that you're going the right depth into your wood. Now, when we did our top, we were using 1x6 boards. So a 1x6 board isn't 1 inch wide, it's actually 3/4 of an inch wide. So this is where we would have adjusted our depth. Now, today we're going to be putting pocket holes into a 2x4. A 2x4, of course, is not actually 2, it's 1.5 inches. So you simply loosen that with an Allen wrench, and then you can slide that and tighten it back up, and now it's set for 1.5 inches. But when you're using a different width wood, you have to adjust your Kreg jig accordingly. Now your second adjustment on your Kreg jig is the depth that you're going to drill here. So you can see that currently it's set for 3/4. You just loosen this up, move this up to your 1.5 position, and you're ready to go. So for each one of these 2x4s, there will be 2 holes going in. So you just set your 2x4 pretty square on your pocket hole jig and use your 2 outside holes here, and then you'll make sure that they are set equally into the wood. And you'll have to do that 4 times for each board. 2 here, 2 here, and you want to make sure this is the inside of the board here. So if one side is rougher than the other, then the smoother side should be outside, and then the inside of the board will be the rough part that won't show. So after you get your pocket holes together, and I've clamped this just to show you, but this is basically what one end of the table looks like. And here will be where the top shelf will sit on top of here. There'll be another one of these crossbars in the middle, and then toward the bottom for my 2 other shelves. And you can see that the Kreg pocket holes are all hidden on the inside here, so when you screw this together, you're not going to see it. Now, one other thing to notice is all of your 2x4s are cut with a slightly rounded edge here. So if you just butt together a board that you have cut, which is flat, then that's what it looks like. It looks like it has a gap, and it's actually very flat against that board, but because this side is rounded and this side is flat, then it looks like there's a problem. So all you need to do is to sand this off on this board here at a little more of a curve, and it still looks like there's a bit of a gap, but it looks like both boards are trimmed the same way with a rounded corner. So it looks a whole lot better than that, which looks like there's a gap, but there really isn't. So just a helpful little tip when you're working with 2x4s. So as I mentioned, my table will have a top, and then it will have 2 shelves below the top. So the top actually extends and overhangs outside of the frame itself. But the bottom 2 shelves, I don't want them to overhang. I want them to come out flush with the frame. So what I had to do was I had to get this total width here to be 15 inches. So I've got a 1x6 here and a 1x6 here. The real measurement on the 1x6 is 5.5 inches. So I've got 11 inches between those 2 outside boards. Then what I had to do is come in here and take this other 1x6 board and rip it down to 4 inches. So it's only 4 inches wide. So you add your 5.5 and 5.5, you get 11 inches, and then the 4 inches in the middle, and you get your 15 inches. I've taken all of our pieces and I've painted them white. I'm starting to build the sides of the frame here. I've clamped in the block that I need. This is going to be the top of my table. Make sure on the outside you get the pieces that will look best. In other words, make sure it's turned so the outside is the smoother part of the 2x4, and then you're ready just to screw this together. All right, so the two end pieces to our table are done. You see, this is the inside. You see where the pocket holes are. These pocket holes won't show because the shelf will be sitting on here like this, and you won't, looking down, you won't see the pocket holes on the inside of this. The last part of this frame will be to put the long pieces across, which will be the front and the back of the unit. I can't do those actually till I get up there to their house because it would just be too big to fit in the back of my SUV. So I will take this up in pieces and I will assemble it when I get up there and set it up down in the basement. Begin assembly, I laid one of the end pieces down on its side and then clamped the front and back long pieces to connect with pocket screws. Then stand the unit up and connect the other side with the pocket screws and clamps as well. Because of the short distance between the top shelf and the second shelf, I loosened the frame just a bit to get the second shelf in. With the shelf resting on the two side supports, I could then mount the front and the back supports, holding them with clamps. Then I could put my pocket hole screws in to hold them fast. I clamped the bottom shelf to the side supports and then turned the unit upside down to make it easier to work on the front and back supports. I clamped the top shelf in place and then started inserting the L brackets to hold it fast. I screwed 4 L brackets under each shelf to make sure they wouldn't slide around and that they would fit nice and flush against the supports. So the television console project turned out really well. It's attractive and a much more effective way of having this TV stand than on a plastic table. As you can see, I mentioned that in the beginning that I had to fit this through between two brick walls, and you see how they jut out just a bit on each side, but that worked out great. This is really a pretty poplar wood on top with nice grain. I'm a big fan of poplar. It has 4 coats of polyurethane. The bottom 2 shelves have 2 coats each of polyurethane. This is a great project. Looks much better down here. Pretty proud of it. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe.